Stanley Fischer, thanks indeed for joining us today and really looking at the global financial architecture and the idea that that can in some way be reformed or changed. Can this indeed be the case in view of the fact that many economies are at different levels of development and they have different outlooks?
Well, we need a framework that permits many countries to succeed while they're at very different levels of development. And so you need a flexible framework, and it is pretty flexible. And if you reflect on the fact that the global economy, with some strains, has accepted the rise of China, which is one of the great events of economic history, without massive problems. It may have contributed somewhat to the recent problems, but it's not been a huge problem for the global economy, and that's a sign of the flexibility with which the global economy can operate. And I think the fundamental issue is what sort of exchange rate systems you have. We don't really have much choice except flexible exchange rates.
So in essence, we have to look forward to continued volatility, certainly where currencies are concerned. And as you say, with the rise of China, would you see greater volatility or less so in view of the fact that in many ways it would be a new architecture, a new pattern of international finance?
Well, I hope the rise of China will be followed by the rise of much of the rest of Asia, and there are a lot of other people in countries which have a lot of room for growth. So we could have another such phenomenon in aggregate. And volatility is what happens in markets. Markets are looking ahead, so when they change their view that this country's going to grow fast, the immediate reaction is very rapid, and that's the volatility, and that's the way the global economy actually adjusts itself to these future changes. You see something happening, you respond. Those responses themselves produce the changes in prices that then encourage the changes that people have foreseen. And sometimes they get it wrong.
That's actually a neat point from which to look at your former role with the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. And I mean, that institution came out of really the Second World War, the requirements for that era. But is the IMF fit for purpose now, would you say?
I feel sorry in some ways for the IMF because there are two complaints about it. One is it continuously reinvents itself, and the other is it's not fit for the purpose. It does continuously reinvent itself. It was designed for one system of exchange rates. It's operating in another one. It was designed for a system in which the fundamental problems in international economic relations were differences in sales in the current account of the balance of payments, exports and imports. Now it's dealing fundamentally with problems in the capital account, movements of capital. All these things are massive changes in the design of the IMF, and it has to keep reinventing itself because the system doesn't work without some institution in the middle which can deal rapidly with problems that are bound to arise, and it mitigates those impacts.
Now, you had a former role as the governor of the Bank of Israel, and that went through, I think, the problems of the 2008 crisis extremely well, as it turned out. Do you think that that role and that, if you like, status, that approach that was taken by the Bank of Israel could also be more widely flung into the financial system going forward?
The hidden part of what happened was that Israel had had a difficult situation in 2002, 2003, and had really undertaken important changes which put it in very good shape when the crisis came. The budget was balanced, the balance of payments was in surplus, the banks were strong. So it had done a lot of things, not knowing that this crisis would come, of course, but which fitted it to deal with the crisis. And then on that basis, you could operate a very flexible monetary policy. If there'd been a mess in the budget, and we'd have had to be focusing on other things. So I think the message of that is get the basics right, and that'll give you much more time and much more room for being inventive, if that's what's needed, to come through a tough period.
Just had to look forward to 2014, which many of us here at the Asian Global Dialogue have been doing over the last couple of days. What do you foresee as being the way forward in terms of where you see the year? Do you see the year as being a more successful year than 2013? And do you see that continuing into the future, bearing in mind what we've just talked about on the new financial architecture?
Well, we're coming out of a very bad recession, so I hope we can look forward to continued improvement. There are countries which are way off their potential level of production, particularly in the advanced countries. We do expect more rapid U.S. growth because there won't need to be as strong adjustments in the budget as have happened so far. Europe seems to be beginning to grow, and that's a big change. And China, after a lot of concern earlier this year, has created a lot of optimism with the results of the third plenum, which are seen increasingly almost every day to be more important than was thought when they first came out. Those are big sources of growth. And then you have another two facts. Both Africa and Latin America look much better than they did, say, 10, 20 years ago.
Stan Fischer, thanks very much for those comments.
Thank you.